Welcome to our newest adventure for first responder wellness. No one fights alone. In-depth conversations about mental health and culture in the first responder space. We're joined by your co-hosts Austin Pedersen and Brad Shepard.
My friend, once again, I seems like I say I'm excited every time, but I really am. I'm excited. Once again, we're going to have a fantastic guest on today.
Yeah. I mean, since you took over as my co-host in this, back in January 1st is when we started. You have been talking about this particular episode and doing this since day one. So I'm super excited. I mean, even for myself, I'm not going to put it too much out yet, but when you told me, I went on Amazon, purchased, watched this movie. Awesome story. And so I'm really excited.
I'm telling you, read the book, watched the movie. So without any further delay, let's just invite on Jonathan Hickory, 20-year sergeant, a law enforcement officer in Virginia, author of the book Break Every Chain, made into a movie. We'll talk about that later. He's a resiliency instructor. He's a motivational and inspirational speaker. He's a father and a husband. And what I like about the book, one of my favorite lines, he's a self-described monster. There's got to be such a story behind that title. Jonathan Hickory, welcome to the No One Fights Alone podcast, man.
Thanks, Brad. I appreciate it, brother. Thank you, Austin. Appreciate you guys and all that you do for our brothers and sisters. It's just amazing work. I'm a self-described monster. How am I supposed to even start talking after you call me that?
Hey, man, that's just a little tease for the book. The book is so good. And there was just something that resonated, there were so many things about that book that I associated with me personally. There's a lot of nuances of it that are part of my story. And, that really, the self-described monster really resonated with me. But, let's back up a little bit. Let's just start in on a little bit about who you are. Tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got into law enforcement. And then let's just dive into your story.
Sure. Well, thanks so much. I appreciate what you said about the book and about the movie, and I'm so thankful that it's helping so many people, especially brothers and sisters in law enforcement, fire, dispatch, and other first responders. So I am originally from Massachusetts, so up in New England, and grew up there. I am a birthright Boston Red Sox fan. And I grew up in a pretty normal family. I see Austin shaking his head. I don't know if that was a good thing about the Red Sox. Awesome. All right. I grew up in a pretty normal family. Four total kids. So I have a brother and two sisters, and my parents were wonderful people, and they were married for several years, and I wanted for nothing as a child. I mean, it's not like I was spoiled, but my dad made pretty good money. He was the breadwinner for our family, and we had an in-ground pool, and in New England when it's only open for 2 months a year, that's a big thing. I just remember, as a kid having a very normal childhood, riding my BMX bike with my tube socks and watching my Ninja Turtles, and just a great childhood growing up. So pretty normal kid, American kid. And when I was 11 years old, we found out that my father had terminal cancer. He was involved in the development of abrasives, like grinding wheels and things like that. But he actually he had some patents in his name. He was super smart. So I guess when you bake the abrasives, you bake the grinding wheels, that process has been known to actually cause lung cancer. And he had cancer that spread throughout his body before they could catch it, and it was too far advanced. So they gave him about 6 months to live. And I just remember my mom sitting me down and telling me and my younger sister at the time, I was 11, and my younger sister was 9. And I'm sharing with this with you guys because I think it's very important to realize where does our story begin. I want you to think about anybody who's listening right now. I want you to think about your own childhood. I want you to think about the goods, the bads. Not everything's going to be great. Not everything's going to be horrible in your childhood. But sometimes when you're exposed to really, really horrible things, it has a lot to do with how you turn out later in life and how you process things. But I just remember that when I found out that my father was going to die and there was nothing that we could do about it, I had of course I was sad, but I was so angry. Like there was so much anger inside of me. And we even went, my dad actually made it 13 months after he was diagnosed. And they gave him, I think, 6 months, like I said. So we had time to take this last vacation together to Disney World, because where else would you go, right? And like my father's employer paid for the whole thing, but it was like the worst trip ever. Because, yes, it's wonderful to be in Disney World. It's wonderful to be able to, do that and enjoy that with your family. But it's bittersweet, right? Because the whole time you're just looking at your father and you know that this is the last trip you're going to take with him. So that really affected me, especially as a young, 11, 12-year-old boy. I remember the morning that he passed away. I was awakened by the sound of a car backing into our driveway. I looked down from my bedroom window into the driveway and I saw a hearse backing up into our driveway. So these are the things that I remember from my childhood, and these are not good memories, right? So as I started to become like a young man, we moved about 3 months after my father died. We moved from my home state of Massachusetts, away from my school, my church, my friends, my counselor that I was seeing, all these things. And we moved to Virginia because my mom had to find work to support the family. So we wound up in Virginia, and my whole life was, I mean, I'm sure you can only imagine, right? It was very hard. And throw on top of that becoming a young teenage boy and all the hormones and stuff like that. So a lot of anger, a lot of depression. Not that I knew what that was at the time. When you're 13 years old, when you're 12 years old, you don't really know what about that stuff. But it really affected me. And as I continued to become a young man and into my high school years, I really struggled. With self-esteem issues and fitting in, and just again the anger was always a recurring problem. So fast forward a couple of years through these rough teenage years, and here's what's important to recognize is that during this time when I was struggling and I felt like I was always drowning, I felt like my life was broken. I felt like everybody else in the world always was thriving, and I felt like I was the one that was screwed up. Always, I felt like that. And I didn't really know if anyone else felt like that, but certainly that's the way that I felt. So this childhood trauma just kind of stayed with me, and I carried it in a very heavy way. But as I grew up and got a little bit older, the anger and the depression continued to be a problem. It affected, when I started driving, I remember that I was a really bad road rager as a 16-year-old punk kid. I'm really lucky nobody pulled me out of the car and beat me up or something. I'm lucky I didn't end up in juvenile detention for some of the behavior. And so so then I became a cop. The end. No, just kidding. So no. Yeah. So no, I actually job hopped quite a bit after graduating high school. I had enrolled in a bunch of college classes, and the depression, really took over when I got out of high school. And I really didn't have any father figure to hold me accountable, so I kind of dropped out of a lot of classes and wasn't really doing too well. So I did a lot of job hopping. I did a lot of soul searching, and wound up in kind of the IT field. I was doing some computer stuff, and then 9/11 hit, and all the dot-coms and all the technology companies went, crash and burn. And so I really felt a calling to serve my country, serve my community, and that's when I started looking into law enforcement, looking into that calling that I felt. I don't know if you guys can relate to that at all, or the calling, but certainly it's something that you're very drawn to, and you just can't explain it. Um,
I do think there's this. I can identify partly with, in large part to that calling piece, because this is, I grew up a farm kid and figured out real fast that wasn't going to be me. But there's a spiritual nuance to my story that's very much ingrained in the early on of how I got there. So I absolutely identify with that. And in fact, there's some head scratching things that occurred that can only be explained with spiritual answers as to how I ended up getting on my organization. But yeah, I that really resonates with me. But so yeah, keep pressing on. Great stuff.
Well, I like that you talked about the spiritual aspect, because one of the things that I forgot to mention was that, I prayed every night when I was a boy, that God would save my dad, that God would heal him. And when my father eventually died, that anger was pointed a lot at God. I believed in God as a young boy. I was raised in the church and everything. I had to memorize a whole bunch of Bible verses and things like that. But your understanding of a higher power at that point is pretty limited, and so I just felt like, quite honestly, God sucked. I was super angry at God for taking my dad, um, and so, but yeah, back to the law enforcement career. So when I had also met my wife around the same time, and we actually dated and were engaged for a long time before we got married, because I made I promised her parents that I would allow her to finish school before we get married. But my wife, Stacy, is like I married up. Okay, she's amazing. She's beautiful. She's an amazing young lady, or I say young, but she is younger than me. But she's an amazing woman, and she is just an absolute radiant person, and she's so strong. But I met her, and we got married about the same time I was becoming a police officer. So, like, I guess, Brad, for the first time in my life, I felt like, okay, maybe my life is going to be okay. Like, maybe I can get back to normal. Maybe my life is all right, because after all these years of like feeling like I was screwed up and I was broken and nothing was going right in my life, I finally had a glimpse of hope. This amazing woman, and then this amazing new career that I was so excited about. So I think it was 2003 I got hired on as a police officer, and then 2004 I was married about 3 months or 2 months after I completed my field training program. So, kind of a wild ride, all happening at once. And then as I began my career with the department, it was a larger department, not like 1,000, but like 150 officer department. And, it was surreal. We get into this line of work, and you can do all the research you want. You can read all the books you want. You can watch all the shows you want. But until you get on the street and doing it, no one really understands what it's like. But
And there is no way to fully prepare somebody for that. What you're just describing there's no way to articulate. And even having people do ride-alongs, that still doesn't fully ingrain them into the saturation of the difficulties of the job. It really doesn't. So yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's there's just no, other than doing it, there's really no way. But I think that a lot of the family, of officers really start to be affected by the officer becomes, a person becomes a police officer, and it's not just the officer, the person that's becoming an officer. Their entire family is affected by this new career. With all the, of course, missed holidays, missed sports games with kids and things like that. But you carry a lot of these things home with you. When something major happens on your shift, you're going to bring it home with you, and even if you don't want to talk about it, it's going to come out maybe in ugly ways. And so it really affects the whole family. But I think that you can try to prepare. There are lots of resources out there to try to make it not such a surprise. But it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, you're not going to process it like in a healthy way, unless you're in a good place already. I guess if that makes sense. You have to be already leading this life of balance, of balanced resilience, or else it can turn to bad things. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But as a young officer, everything was the most awesome thing ever. Like, I wanted to stop every car that moved. I wanted to arrest everybody. I wanted to arrest my mom. Not really, but like, like I got the DUI award from like the Mothers Against Drunk Driving. I got that like 3 years in a row. My first 3 years, and I mean, I was really out there trying to do all sorts of stuff. But after a couple of years, the novelty of this job, and I think that's why you see so many cops, they'll start out and then in 2 or 3 years they leave, because after a couple of years, the newness of the job wears off, and you're like, the heaviness starts to set in, and yes, exactly, and you start to feel like all this stuff is starting to stack up, in this backpack on your back, full of like super heavy rocks, and it starts to become a heavy burden to bear, and so that is something I started to feel pretty quickly. Probably within the first two years, I started to feel that. Started to really not understand like how to cope with it. I knew that there is definitely a stigma, and it's still alive and well today, that you're not supposed to talk about these things if you're struggling. I know that even now, we now know that the number one cause of death every year for police officers is not line of duty deaths, it's suicide. Same is true for firefighters. Same is true for all first responders, is that we die more on our own hand than line of duty death, because we don't want to talk to anybody else about it. If we're struggling, and that's where I started to struggle, and I started to have the dream. Have you ever had the dream, Brad?
Oh yeah. You talking about the bad video loop dream?
No, this one is the gunfight dream, where your gun doesn't work.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Have you ever had that one?
Mine's driving. The car's not working the way it's supposed to. It's not responding.
I want to hear. So I want to hear about that dream.
Yeah, so it's directly related to a near auto accident of responding to another pursuit, and where I nearly lost control of my car. And from that dream came this car driving dream where the car's not responding correctly, So yeah. Is that similar to what you're talking about?
So it's similar in that, and we're going to break it down in a second here, okay? So my dream that I don't, thank God I don't have it anymore, very rarely, but it really, once I started going to counseling and really coping with stuff in healthy ways, the dream went away. So I'll say that. But for years, I had this dream, and most police officers will have this dream. And it's a dream where you're in a gunfight. It could be multiple suspects, it could be one suspect, but the thing that reigns true every time is that you're trying to send rounds at this suspect, and no matter how hard I pull the trigger, the gun will not go off. That's right. There's different variations of it. Like, I've heard variations of syrup bullets, where they're oozing out of the gun, or the bullets will drop on the ground right in front of you at your feet, and not, going where they should. And so if you break those two dreams down, your dream with the driving and the car's not responding, my dream with the gunfight, and your gun doesn't work no matter how hard you pull the trigger. The thing that's the same is that it's something that we need to be in control of. We want to be in control of. We have to be in control of, but we're not in control of it. And it's like a panic, a fear factor, the inside of us, that it's like our worst fear is that we're not in control. Because as in this profession, as a first responder, you are to control the situation, the scene, whatever you're responding to. And when you feel like you can't control everything, because you can't, but we want to. When you
You
feel
think
like
you
you
can?
can't, you think you can, right? But and so those dreams are anxiety dreams. They're anxiety and control dreams. That was how it was explained to me from my police psychologist. And so I think that it's important to know that if you're having that dream, it's pretty normal to have it. And it might be helpful to go to talk to a psychologist or a counselor about it, because you're trying to hang on to something that we can't hang on to. And when we can learn to start to let some of that stuff go, that's when we can start to like relax a little bit and heal and not be such a Richard all the time, as a lot of us can be. That's where, for me, faith comes in now, because I feel like belief in a higher power, belief in God, belief in a creator, it helps you to believe that ultimate control is above your pay grade, and you don't have to worry about everything that happens. Yeah, you can still shine your shoes, you can still target practice at the range, you can still be ready, right? You can still do driver training, but like ultimate control is not going to be your responsibility anymore. So that helps me a lot. We got a little bit out of order there, but
No. That's good. We could chase a number of those rabbits, which
yeah,
I think is yes, I agree. I'm just the control piece. Yes, I echo that so greatly. So this is a fascinating piece of our culture, specific to most first responder disciplines in their own individualistic way. But for law enforcement, we're bringing calm to chaos. So our jobs are, no matter what, we've got to calm that situation down. And in order to do that, you take on this kind of superhero cape of I'm here to control everything and baseline that out. And it starts to permeate its way into all facets of your life. It just starts to ooze into, all areas of, I have to control this and I have to control that. And yeah. And I could not agree with you more that if you're there in those dreams, it's time to start having conversations with somebody.
yeah. I mean, I love that you said that, talking about it starts to ooze into different parts of your life, because um, to be, I think that, I mean, how many people that are listening right now can relate to, like, your car has to be sparkling clean? There's somebody just is eating French fries in the back seat, and you're like,
Yep.
this is a problem.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
I still
Everything's in
won't let
order.
like my kids can eat in the car certain things, right? But like that big old, grumbly, crumbly Nutri-Grain bar, it ain't
No,
happening, kid.
no, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
So even today, I admit very readily that I'll always be broken, but I'm a lot more healed than I used to be. I think we're all broken. But you can live your life one day at a time, in a resilient manner, that you can survive this job and survive this life. Um, but so I was starting to struggle early on in my career, and I did at one point go to another officer. So about 4 years into my career, I was able to join our traffic unit. I was Mr. Like, I said I got all the DUI stops and everything. So I was able to go over to our traffic unit. It's a small unit. It's only like 5 people, 6 people. And so it was a big honor to be selected for that. But part of that with the department that I work for is, and this is fairly common, is you're not only a ticket writer and a motor guy or a motor officer or whatever, but you're also a fatal crash reconstruction officer. So, you go to the special training for that, and any time it's a really bad crash with somebody getting maimed or killed, you're responding to that. So, I was already kind of struggling when I got into that unit, and then and now it was like every fatality that happened, I was there for that. So I think that just made things worse for me because I wasn't facing my stuff. I wasn't facing the trauma. And now, like, I had a nice little stack going on. So I had the death of my father, which wrecked me. And that, I mean, because I love my dad so much. He was such an amazing person. He cared so much about our family. I cared so much for the children. Loved my mom so much. Like, never saw them fight. Um, yeah, I mean, he beat my butt sometimes, but like, that's a loving father. So I was still pretty wrecked from that, and even though I was older, time does not heal that wound if you're not going to face it. It's like, if you get shot by by an RPG and you just put like just put some dirt on it and cover it up with a
Put a
Band-Aid,
little
it's not going
Band-Aid
to
on
really,
it. That's it. Yeah.
hey, yeah, rub
Yeah.
some dirt in it. Not going to fix it, right? So, um, as I continued in my police career, all these other traumas that I was exposed to just started stacking on top of that. And so alcohol became my thing, like so many other of us. Alcohol is so accepted in our culture. And I never had, here's the crazy thing, I never had a substance abuse problem before I became a police officer. I was getting along okay without that. And so it just goes to show you that, like, the new trauma, I couldn't cope with it. I couldn't cope with it on my own. And so, after I joined the traffic unit and started doing all these deaths, fresh kills, as I call them, death scenes, and you're a liaison to the family, and, getting to know this person personally, and, there's children that are killed and all this horrible things. I went to this other officer and I was like, hey, like, I'm really struggling, like, I'm having nightmares about this stuff, and I'm seeing these images in my head, and like, it's bothering me. Like, it took a lot of courage for me to go to this guy and say that, this senior officer. And I just remember his response where he laughed. He laughed and he said, "Oh, you got to just let that, stuff." He didn't say stuff. Roll off your back like water off of a duck or something. And I'm like, okay, well, now I feel stupid. Here's this guy with like double my experience. I really look up to him. I really respect him, and I still do respect the guy. But like, he in that moment made me feel ashamed for bringing it up, for talking about it, and like, it was like this forbidden thing that I had done. So I felt ashamed of my badge. I felt ashamed of of admitting it. I felt like I was suddenly weak and broken again. And now I'm thinking, okay, it's true. I'm the only one. Clearly, I'm the only one that's struggling in this. Everybody else is fine. I'm just not cut out for this. But
One of the things, if I can jump in here, one of the things I think is pretty common is and I'd love to have your take on this, because what really is resonating with me in this conversation is the traffic side, because being a trooper, dozens and dozens and dozens of fatal crashes that I was involved in and participated in. And when they talk about that, some people get the idea that all those bother you the same. And what I found, my experience was, not all of them really stick, but there are certain ones that stand out that are enormously impactful. And they're not the dozens. They're more, like single digit of, that these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 individual crashes, of a family crash or a baby crash or a teenager that lost, those things that really stick. And not all of these in your backpack really are so haunting, but man, the ones
true.
that are, when you go have a conversation with somebody, it doesn't haunt them. So they say, that shouldn't have bothered you. It doesn't bother me. And that's where that education piece, I'm sure that's where you're going with this, but this education piece of understanding, okay, it may bother me. It still bothers me, even though it doesn't bother you. So is that fair? Is that,
Yeah, no, it's so true. That's such a like that's incredible because I think that the ones that my theory on it is that the ones that affect us the most are the ones that we have a personal connection to. So if you have small children and now you're working a crash with small children, or for me it was one of the ones that really disturbed me was working the crash of a guy that I was friends with in high school, and I would never like pretend that I was like chums, best buds with the guy, but we'd hung out some, and yeah, I think that when there's a soul connection with someone, that person, it makes it more difficult. I think if you can relate to it because it's a small child, or whatever it is that you're having struggling with, maybe you can't explain it. Like maybe there's just like this, if you've seen the movie, the Break Every Chain movie, there's a crash scene with a teenage girl, and they show the fingernails, the pink fingernails or green fingernails or whatever they were, and that was supposed to be something that like resonated as a haunting image, because it's like this innocent young life taken, and that was based on a true crash that that happened, but like it's like the hopelessness, like a young life taken before its time, a 16-year-old girl, and just so full of life, so full of promise, endless possibilities, and the life has been robbed from them, and so now you're filled with hopelessness because all you can focus on is like, nobody wins in this situation, even if you get to charge somebody else with manslaughter or reckless driving or whatever, like nobody wins, and the family will forever mourn the death of their daughter, and so I think that's what really got to me more than anything was the human side of it, is the loss of people, the loss of children, the loss of loved family members, you know
and I think you just hit on something that I think it's very important to point out, which is actually that's what happens is we humanize that entire situation, and we're programmed to not do that. They do that in our training, they do that in our academies, they do that in our field training, whereas it's you're taught and reprogrammed, brainwashed, if you will, to disconnect and disassociate with that human side, because it's all part of that control you were talking about early, of controlling the situation, bringing calm to chaos. And I love where you're going with this, because this is really important. This is an important point to say. When you actually humanize the call, your heart starts to become very vulnerable to that, and that ekes its way in to. That's where we talk about getting stuck. That's where some of those calls get stuck. So yeah, I love this.
Yep. And that's one side of it. And then the other side of it is like if it was a shooting or something like that, and something goes the way you didn't want it to. So now you're having trouble processing that in your brain, and it's stuck. And you keep trying to process it, and it's like, well, that didn't go the way it was supposed to. That didn't go the way it was supposed to. So that's where like EMDR can help. To process that and kind of unstick it. But humanizing a call, like that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to have emotions. And certainly if we did that with every single call, and you're like, oh, like this domestic I went to, the guy punched his girlfriend in the eye and it's so horrible. Like we would never be able to survive this job. You have to put on your game face and go to work. But sometimes you just can't. You're affected by it. I recall a 11-year-old, 11 or 12-year-old young man who hung himself, and the mother found him, and it's like, what do you say to that mother? Where's the training in the academy for that? Like, you can't there is no, that's what I'm saying. People may go on a ride along or whatever, but until you have to face these kinds of scenes, it's just, you know, I think where we can do well is come together, like, you know, call out the chaplain, you know, get the supervisor on the scene, like get other people there. Don't feel like you have to fight it alone, you know, and I'm looking at your no one fights alone, you know, in the background, you know, that's a good time to remind people that, like, you know, that you don't have to go this alone. And I think that so many people, as first responders, we feel like we have to fight this battle on our own, and we're not meant to do that. It doesn't work. So I was going to get back to my career. So I started picking up alcohol as a way to cope because I wasn't dealing with my trauma. And alcohol, like, I liked it a lot. It became this thing that allowed me to escape reality. It allowed me to escape the trauma of losing my father, the trauma of all um, the death and dysfunction and abuse that I was seeing on the job. And so I started to abuse it, and I started to get to the point where I became an alcoholic, a functioning alcoholic. And I always thought that I was different, that I really wasn't an alcoholic, because I was like, well, you know, I can still get to work. I'll never drive drunk. And, you know, yeah, I get this headache all the time, but like I can function. So if you're, you know, I would go on the internet and search like how many drinks a day before you're considered an alcoholic, and like if you do that, like, you know, that could be your
Maybe a
clue.
sign. Yeah, maybe a sign. Yeah.
9, okay. But also, like, I was really good at hiding it, and you know, I think cops are great actors. First responders are good at putting on that game face and hiding things. And so, you know, my wife might see a couple of beers in the trash can or whatever, but I'd hide the fifth of liquor. I'd hide the wine bottle the entire bottle of wine that I drank on top of the 2 beers, you know. And all I was doing was trying to get drunk every night. It got so bad that if I didn't drink, I'd have withdrawal symptoms. I could feel things crawling on me that weren't there, obviously. And so I tried to kick it when my first daughter was born. Tried to kick the habit. I wanted to be a good dad, and, you know, started like running 5Ks and whatever I could to do something else to cope with it, with the stress and the trauma, and went right back to it. Because now I have the stress of being a parent. But no excuse. But, you know, I just couldn't shake it. So the years started to go by, and this was my life. I was an alcoholic for years, like probably almost 10 years. And nobody knew. It was my horrible, dirty secret. And over these years, I just became a more bitter, cynical jerk. And this is where the monster came in. Just an absolute jerk. My wife and I, in 2013, we became pregnant with our second child, but our marriage was awful. It was my fault. I was a horrible husband, a horrible father, and just an angry, cynical, bitter, short-tempered prick. But I was a great cop. Like, I was winning all my cases, and, you know, like, just doing awesome in my career. It's like the only thing I was good at. And so I somehow justified, you know, everything else. When we were pregnant with the second child, we started having some complications, and my wife lost the child 5 months into the pregnancy. We did not know it at the time, but it turned out it was a boy. And so it was like, when that happened, I just remember I was already in such a dark place, and, you know, not facing anything in healthy ways, and an alcoholic. And that when this death happened of my firstborn son, that I just, I can't explain it. Like, the darkest heaviness fell over me. And I remember just thinking, like, if there isn't even is a God, how could he take my dad from me and my son from me? Like, if God exists, he's awful. Um, and so I started just doing whatever I wanted. I didn't face the loss of the child. I figured, well, I'm tough. I'm a cop, so I can fix anything, including myself, because clearly I'm already doing so good at that already. And so, so I refused to go get any help. Refused to go talk to anybody. My wife started going to church at that point because we hadn't then. I refused to do that. I was like, hell no, I'm not going to church because if there is a God, I'm not going to church.
There's a scoreboard at this point, right? Like there really is. I feel that a lot with my own, personal journey is as life goes on and things start to become more and more difficult or terrible things happen, the scoreboard against God becomes a tough one to overcome.
That's exactly where I was. And for the first time in my life, as a person that always believed in God, I'm not saying I had this awesome, like I was a check the box Christian, like what religion are you? That one. That's about it. That was my faith. So I believe that there
Yep.
was that
Christmas and Easter, right?
Yeah, if God was lucky, he'd get me on Christmas and Easter. More likely homecoming. Homecoming was like this church gathering where they always had food, so I'd usually be at those.
Right on.
But it's silly, but that's what my relationship with God was. And so I was just like, for the first time in my life, when after the loss of this child, I was like, okay, I don't know if God exists, and like to always have believed before that, and now start thinking maybe God doesn't exist. Like that's kind of a sick feeling that I was having, because it's like, what if it's not true? And so I was really having a crisis of faith. I was having a lot of things going on, and then I started to like, this is what happens when you don't get help. By the way, with trauma, your brain processes it the way it wants to, which isn't always the right way. And so I started to associate the death of the child with my wife. And so I couldn't look at my wife. I couldn't talk to my wife. I couldn't be in the same room as my wife. And that obviously that is so unfair to her. That's so twisted and wrong. And like the hell was wrong with me. But I didn't know what was wrong with me. And again, I tried to like ask another cop for advice about this. I'm like, yeah, I'm really struggling with this. And his advice, I won't even say it. It was so bad. You got to go to the right people. You got to go to professionals. You got to go to people that know how to help you. Like a peer supporter might be able to listen, but they're not going to be able to maybe help you heal from the loss of a child, And so I think it's good to vent, but some things you really need to go get professional help. But I wouldn't, so I just kept doing my own thing, and that started to lead to self-destruction. And so as I started to self-destruct, and I didn't care if I lived or died, I didn't care what happened to me, and I'm just living for myself at this point because it made me feel better. That's when affairs started, like infidelity. That's when reckless behavior on the job started. Probably my complaints went up, but also like going to calls that I probably shouldn't have by myself. Going to help with calls when I'm not even on duty, without a vest on, things like that. So just reckless behavior. And the heaviness continued. The alcoholism got worse, if that was even possible. I remember in 2014, my wife planned this amazing trip to Disney World. And I mean, she's not a sugar mama or anything. She was a teacher in public school at the time. But she saved, at the time, it was over $5,000 for us to go to Disney World for a week. My daughter was 5 years old, and I'm like, well, I had taken off the time to go, and this was about 16, 17 months after the loss of this child. So I'm in this downward spiral. And I told my wife that I couldn't go. And she's like, what? Like, you took the time off. What are you talking? She's like, I'm like, oh, I got all this stuff to do at work and I just really can't go. So I'm standing back and I'm ready to let my wife and my 5-year-old daughter drive to Disney World, 12-hour drive by themselves and go see Ariel and Cinderella and all them, because I didn't want to go, because I thought that I couldn't support my alcohol habit for that week, that I wouldn't be able to drink in the hotel room, or that Mickey wouldn't have a bar open, or whatever. So I did end up going, but I solved the problem by going and buying a bunch of liquor bottles. My suitcase would clank when you set it down, and I would drink in the hotel room, after everybody else was asleep. So I spent the whole Disney vacation hungover, miserable, and cursing Mickey Mouse. But I mean, my 5-year-old had a good time. Like, she was oblivious to my. But that's where the monster part comes in. That was the worst I'd ever been. I'm in the middle of affairs. I'm throwing my wife away, throwing my marriage away, and treating my family like crap. And that was when my wife told me, I wrote about it in the book, I hate you. She, for the first time. And like, that was my reality check a little bit. I kind of needed to hear it. That was started to make me think. But then I got back from Disney World, and about maybe, I think it was like within a week of getting back, I can't remember, but I was marching to internal affairs for the first time in my life. Have you guys ever been in IA?
Oh yeah.
He said, oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I hadn't, and I'm not saying I'm perfect, okay, but like, I'd been maybe for one little thing or here or there, but to be walked in there by my supervisor, and a voice recorder plopped down in front of me, and they said, you're being investigated for conduct unbecoming of an officer. You need to turn in your department issued laptop and your cell phone. You need to give us the password, the lock codes, and you're not to discuss this with anyone in the department. Of course, what did I hear? Anyone. So, I certainly couldn't talk about it with my wife, because this conduct unbecoming of an officer had to do with the infidelity. I mean, you can't be doing that as a married man, as a police officer. It's unbecoming. And so my sins had caught up with me, and they said, you can go home early without your laptop or your cell phone, but you can go home early. And so I went home, and I'm like, looking up the policy and the discipline, and how bad is this? And it goes all the way to termination. And I'm like, oh my God, like, oh my gosh, like, so I get home, and I'm just I'm laying on the bed. The house is quiet, the house is empty, no one's home. My wife's at work, my daughter's in school, and there's just this eerie silence, and I'm battling for my soul. I'm thinking, you're gonna lose your job. It's your identity. It's all you have. You're gonna lose your wife. She's gonna find out what you did, and she's gonna leave you, and she has every right to leave you. And then your daughter's going with her, so you're gonna lose everything in this moment. I hear this voice saying, just end your life. Just end it. It's over. Just and I got this, like, I wanted to throw up. I felt so sick, but I'm like, yeah, this is what I have to do. But in that same moment, I saw this, I saw flames. I saw this vision of fire, and I believe at that moment that I felt like, oh, that's hell. Like, that's where I'm going. Pump the brakes. Like, it scared me. And so that's like the only reason that I didn't keep down that road, because it scared me enough to say, like, well, if you do this, there's definitely no second chance, and you might be going somewhere you don't want to go, and so that's when I surrendered my life. I said, God, like, you suck, but God, I have not done the greatest with my life. I mean, clearly I have not done well. And so I'm done. I'm done. I quit. I'm done with my life. So instead of just throwing it away, I'm going to let you have it, and I'm going to surrender to you. And so that's kind of where my faith journey began. Um, but I also went to go get help. And I didn't I didn't actually make that conscious decision either. I went to my commanding lieutenant a few days later and I said, "What am I supposed to do? I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose everything." And he pulled me into his office and he said, "Are you hurting?" And I'm like, "I am not going to answer that question. Are you crazy?"
That's a setup right there.
Are you hurting? So I just kind of looked at him with panic in my eyes, and he said, "Hang on just a second." So the door's closed, and he gets our department psychologist on the phone, and like the guy answered the phone, which is weird because he's usually always busy, but that's their kind of relationship that they had with each other. And so he says, "Make an appointment with this guy. This is, Dr. Greenberg. This is Jonathan. Jonathan is going to come see you. So make an appointment." He says, "Yeah, call my office. Here's the number. I can see you later this week, whatever." And so that's like how I started going to get professional help. And then later, my wife and I went to see a faith-based marriage counselor, and she actually really dove into all the trauma all the way back to my dad, losing my dad, like that I was still carrying at the age of 35, and didn't realize like how much it was screwing me up. And after I had told this counselor all the crap in my life, all the stuff, the loss of the child, the loss of my dad, all this police trauma, she looks at me, she stops taking notes for 500 pages, and she says, she looks up at me and she says, "Wow, I'm surprised you're doing as well as you are." And I'm like, "Wait, what? There's worse? Like people do worse than me? How?" Like, so that kind of helped me a little bit to feel better. But yeah, that was the beginning of my healing journey. And I tell you, like getting help was the hardest thing to do. But it's just like anything else, once you take those first few steps, you start doing the work, you start seeing the results, like it's the best thing you can do for yourself. And now here I am 8 years later, 8 years sober. And I have my wife and I have restored our marriage. She forgave me. I don't deserve it. I don't deserve her grace, but she made the decision to forgive. And I turned from my old ways. I kicked alcohol. And we not only have we restored our marriage, but it's stronger now. And we have had two more children since then. I have a 6-year-old son, Zachariah, and our youngest daughter, Hope, just turned 3. So we have 3 kids, and they're awesome kids. They're amazing kids. And like, I'm like, God, I have a relationship with God now that I trust in Him. But like, it's a restoration story. It's a miracle, but it's because I got help, and it's because. Go ahead.
I actually pulled I pulled some of your photos up because you and I are connected on Instagram. I was pulling up, and your family just you can tell when people have happy smiles, and your family is just glowing, and it is a true reflection of all that hard work that you did 8 years ago, and what a blessing it is. You see the shining smile on your face, is just absolutely it's mesmerizing because it's such a beautiful family. So let's close the door here on a couple of things, right? So for the listeners that are curious about the IA, maybe.
Oh yeah.
So
Oh yeah, that.
So let's close a couple doors here, right? So you're still on the job. Clearly, we don't have to go into details.
Yeah.
Walk us a little bit through some, closing a couple of those doors.
Absolutely. I'm sorry. I skipped a few things.
No, that's okay.
So no, it took 2 months to get through that investigation, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I lost 15 pounds from the stress, and I'm like not like a fat guy, but I lost a ton of weight, and I was so worried that I was going to lose my job, but so I was disciplined very heavily because I told the truth. Okay, so here's a pro tip: if you get in trouble, you need to be honest, and because you cannot survive lies in this career. So tell the truth, and some of these things can be survivable. It doesn't mean that the road ahead is going to be easy for you, but but power through and keep your integrity. And so I was able to keep my job. I was heavily disciplined. One of the disciplines was I was removed from my position as a traffic officer, motor officer, reconstruction guy, and midnight patrol immediately. And side note, I figured I didn't have to tell my wife about this, about why I suddenly went to midnight. I figured I wouldn't tell her because if she knew that it was because I was being investigated for infidelity, she'd probably like kill me while I slept. So instead, I made up a sort of halfway true story about a pursuit I had been written up for, and that it was related to that. And it was true. I had been written up for a bad pursuit, but it wasn't for that. So she's like, "Oh my gosh, like how can they do this to you? Because like you work so hard." And I'm like, maybe we should just not even question it. It'll be fine. Just
drop it.
Yeah,
I'm okay with it.
Just it's okay. No. So listen, it's so funny because in the movie, we actually when we watched the movie, the director and the lead actor and we watched the movie together a few times, and like that scene, where he's like, it'll be fine, and he cracks open a Pepsi and walks out of the room, just shh. uh, Exactly. It'll be fine. So after that, I'm working midnight shift for 2 months, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like she's gonna find out. I'm such an idiot. Everybody knows she's gonna find out. And God's telling me, like, you need to tell her. Like, you tell her, you idiot, you need to tell her. And I'm like, no, God, like you can save me from a lot of things, but not her wrath. And so he took care of it for me, and she found out anyway, and then we went into marriage crisis. And like you can read about all that in the book, Break Every Chain, but it was hell. And it was all, I know I did it to myself, but she did not have to forgive me. But I think that when we started going to counseling together, that she started to really see how screwed up I was. And she saw my brokenness, and she saw that I was willing to change and work on myself. And that gave her a little bit of hope. I won't speak 100% for her. She actually wrote an epilogue in the newest copy of the book, which looks like the movie art. She wrote the epilogue. My wife did. So it's in the back of the book.
I don't know that I held mine up while I did before we went on air, but that's the old version right there. I've had mine for a while. And
so I actually designed the original cover.
This one?
A professional made it look better, but like that car is my police car.
That's a pretty cool book.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. I actually, this is amazing looking, but I'm proud of the old design too. But the new version, in Brad, I can email you the epilogue if you'd like to read it. But the new version of the book has an epilogue that my wife wrote, because a lot of women want to know. They want to know her side of the story as well. So, so we had a hard journey in front of us. And it's been hard. I mean, it really has. We've had to fight through a lot of things, but what really brought us together was the counseling. We went through about 5 months, double sessions every week of counseling with a faith-based counselor, and I really thought that was all going to be all about the marriage, but it turned out to be just all my stuff, all the stuff that I had been stuffing for so long.
Well, I want to close another door here, and that actually may open up I actually may open up another door before we kind of go into to talking a little bit about the movie, the spiritual side. Let's dive a little bit deeper into because this is very much a faith based book. What you know, let's where because where we left it was the scorekeeping piece when Austin was talking about scorekeeping and you know your I would like to explore that a little bit more because I don't think we dove into that quite as much as what you do in the book and the movie.
So when so after basically starting to question whether God even existed after the loss of my child, my son, which we named Christian, by the way. And Christian came from a dream that my wife had right after the loss and before we knew it was a boy or a girl. Um, God, Stacy had a dream that it was a boy and that God told her to name the boy Christian. And so I just think it's interesting because I didn't really know what that would mean later. But that's what Stacy told me, you know. So um, so when I found out that was in trouble and being investigated, and I thought it was suicidal and almost took my life. That was my moment that I was like, God is the only one that can help me at this point. Like no one else can help me because like I have screwed my life up so bad. And so I took a position of surrender, like, okay, God, like I'm done. I give up. I surrender. I'm done living for me. I'm going to start living for you. And so I started going to church with my wife, and she came home, and I told her that I wanted to go to church with her, and she looked at me like, "Who the heck are you? Like, what's wrong with you?" Um, and I think that a lot of people at first thought that, well, he's just going to church so that like, to try to like show people that he's somebody that he's not, to try to act, a lot of people do that. Will do that. They'll start going to church for a little while and they're like, oh, if it gets me out of trouble, then I'll go to church for a little while and, put on the Christian hat and then, I'll just go back to being my old self. And you can't do that. Like I had to fully surrender my heart, and that last piece of my heart that I was not willing to surrender was the alcohol. Like even after I started, even after I was disciplined and found out I wasn't going to lose my job, like I was trying to cut back on the drinking, like trying to read my Bible and do all the things you're supposed to do, and man, I could not kill the drinking. And so when Stacy found out about the infidelity, I remember we had like this intervention thing at my mom's house, and I was like on the floor weeping. It was awful. I felt so ashamed for all the things I had done to her. Um, that night, she did not kick me out of the house because we had a 5-year-old daughter that she didn't want asking questions. But I found myself on the couch, which I totally deserved. Like I'm grateful I was even in the house. Um, she had every right to leave me at that point. She had every right to divorce me. But that night I was sitting on the couch and I could hear her. I've got a beer in my hand and I'm drinking as usual, and I can hear my wife weeping. Like I can hear her crying. I can hear her weeping across the house. I just felt like so like the biggest monster, the biggest piece of garbage, the biggest piece of trash the world has ever known. And I'm like looking at this bottle, like this is it. This is such a huge part of it is the drinking. And so at that moment, I heard a voice, and it said, "Change your ways and stop drinking, or I will take everything from you." And I'm like, goosebumps. Holy crap. God just talked to me. Okay, God, I heard you. I can't do this alone. Please, God, take this from me. And so I prayed that. And I put the bottle down, and I never touched a drop again since that moment, 8 years ago. And here's the crazy part is that, like, yes, the next day I didn't sleep well that night because of like what had happened that day, but I didn't have withdrawals after that. I told my wife about my secret alcoholism, and she was already super pissed, super angry at me, of course. But instead of like, you know, um, like running over me with the family car, she became my accountability partner, and she helped me get rid of any alcohol that was still in the house. She stopped bringing any bottles of wine home. She talked to family members that would drink beer and stuff, told them not to drink around me, that I was trying to, cut back or whatever. And so she helped me to stop drinking. And like even after that, a few months later, after I kicked alcohol, I well, I, so here's a pro tip: if you haven't want to kick alcohol, I actually would sit on the couch and I'm like, I need something in my hand, like I need something that goes. Psh. So I started drinking Perrier, which don't laugh at me because it says is Perrier, but like you can, I don't care what you can use seltzer water, but when I opened that bottle and went, psh, and I also continued to like use dip, so I continued to use smokeless tobacco. But a few months after I quit drinking, I'm like, this, I don't need this anymore. Like it's gross. And so I quit dipping. After 12 years of dipping, I quit that too. So yeah, it's been just so amazing that like God has restored everything. Because yes, I was at the point where I doubted if he even existed, but I certainly wasn't doing anything that, I was not living. I had zero relationship with God, and I wasn't doing anything that honored him or represented him well. And so I think that honestly, I think he was trying to get my attention with some of this stuff.
Sure. Well, let's dive into the movie a little bit. Or maybe even better yet, the book. What led you to even sit back and say, you know what, I've got a story for the books and hopefully the silver screen. Where did that idea come from?
Well, I never set out hoping that it would be a movie. I think I had no idea what God was going to do with it. Part of my healing journey has been group therapy. And so I used to go to this men's group for about 6 years. I went to this men's Bible study, and and I still go to men's Bible studies now. But this particular guy in the group, they had like prayed me through the pregnancy with my son Zachariah. So when we became pregnant with Zachariah, we were terrified that we were going to lose another child. Like that. You've been through something traumatic. You're afraid it's going to happen again. And so when his pregnancy had no issues and he was born healthy, I remember we were kind of rejoicing and celebrating that and all that God had done to restore my marriage and all the progress. And there was this one guy in our group, Cornell Smith, and he says to me after group, he's like, "Brother, I feel like you're going to write a book or something." I'm like, you smoking crack, like I'm a cop, right? Like I don't want to write a report if I can help it. Like I'm not writing anything. But that was when it was laid on my heart in that moment. And shortly thereafter, God started surrounding me with people who were writing books or had written books. I'm like, okay, I get it. Okay. So I started to write. I did all my own research on how to write a book and laid out an outline with chapters and, just started to write one chapter at a time. And my mom helped me to do some of the editing. Like I'd send her a chapter and she'd print it out and she'd take out a red pen and, like this sentence could be better. This word, what is it? Where are you going with this? Whatever. And she's like, what are you hoping to do with this? And I'm like, you know what, Mom? I don't know. I just feel like I'm supposed to do this. And it took about 9 months to write, which is kind of ironic because 9 months is, how long it takes for a baby to be born. But I started to look around and like, maybe I can get this published. Maybe somebody else. Here's the thing, Brad, like while I was writing this book, I was still convinced no one's going to read this. It's absolute garbage. And I'm the only one. I am the only one in this profession who's ever struggled. Clearly, that is true. And so this is a waste of time. But if one person reads it and it helps them, then awesome. And so, so ended up getting it published. And when it came out, I started to like look into how to market the book. That's when I started learning about all the suicides and all of the post-traumatic stress and stuff that this profession struggles with. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Oh, now I see. Oh my gosh, I'm not the only one. So um, yeah, it started to do really well. I mean, it's not like, Oprah Winfrey's next New York Times bestseller, but I've sold thousands and thousands of copies. And no, I'm not like super rich, but because I have 3 kids, but it has done so well. And so many like police officers, firefighters, and stuff have come up to me behind the scenes usually and said, like, this is me. You just wrote the story of my life. Like, I get it. Thank you. Like, thank you, because I thought I was the only one. Wait a minute, I'm the only one. No, I'm the only one. And so I think it started to really help with this battle that we're all fighting right now against the stigma of like that we're weak if we get help, and like we're the only ones that feel this way, and it's crap. So the book is very powerful, and I definitely wrote it to be engaging, to be funny, and not all heavy, because there is some heavy stuff in it. But I think one guy actually told me he really appreciated that I wrote about all the different cars in the book, like all the different cars that were in my life at the time, because a lot of people can relate to that, right? Like, what was your first car, Brad?
Absolutely. Well, it was a 78 Toyota long bed diesel pickup.
That's cool.
Stick shift.
That's even cooler. Okay, now
top end speed 78 miles an hour. My dad did that on purpose. This is what you're buying.
78, so that would have been a really small one.
It was small. It was not very big. Yeah, it was small, but it would go on 2 wheels. I did that. I made sure didn't do it on purpose, but I did make it happen. But no, there's so much of this book that resonates, and I'm on that list. There's so much of this book resonates with me and hits home, even the monster piece, But for time purposes, let's keep moving. So this book, how do we arrive to? And the book's amazing, the movie's amazing. So I would encourage, of course, I'm a reader. I would encourage reading the book. The book's always just as good, or sometimes even more detailed than the movie. But how do we get to the movie? How does the movie show up? Is this a brainstorm of you, or somebody call you and say, I think this is an idea?
Well, so one of the things that I was trying to do to get it to reach more people was to put it on Audible. And so we have a family friend that has been in radio for 30 years, and he does a lot of voiceovers and stuff like that. And he narrates audiobooks. His name is Will Stoff. And so Will did my audiobook for me, and yes, I paid him. It wasn't free, but he was a lot cheaper back then. Now he's really expensive. But he did my audiobook, and he was kind of following along to see how it was doing. And when it hit like bestseller on Amazon and all these different categories, he's like, that's pretty cool. And he said, this would make a good movie. And I'm like, yeah, thanks. Not really sure what to do with that, but thank you. And a lot of people were saying that it would make a good film. And so I'm like, okay, so what do I just like call up Brad Pitt? Like, how does that work? So I started to pursue it a little bit on my own, and like I even reached out I bought a ticket to a Comic-Con, and I went and met David A.R. White. And then you're like, who the heck is David A.R. White? David A.R. White is the co-founder of PureFlix, and he also has several faith-based films like God's Not Dead, like stuff like that. So he's kind of famous in the faith-based film world. But I gave him a copy of my book, after buying a ticket to meet him. and took a picture with him, and I was like, yeah, this is gonna happen. And I never heard from the guy. Imagine that. So then I emailed Sony Affirm Films. Sony Affirm Films did Heaven is for Real. Sony Affirm Films did Soul Surfer and some other fairly well-known kind of faith-based films. And I actually get a response, and they're like, it sounds great. Like, congratulations on your book, blah, blah, blah. But we don't make movies. If you want to make a movie, we'll buy it from you, maybe. And I was like, okay, well, I don't know how to do that, so I'm done. So honestly, like Stacy and I started to pray that if God wanted to make it into a movie and use it in that way, then He was going to have to do it because we didn't know what to do. So a couple months later, Will Stoff, same guy, audiobook narrator, calls me up and he's like, hey, I'm going to be in a film, and this film company, they do some faith-based stuff. Some of the connections seems like they're there. Why don't you overnight me a copy of the book? I'll give it to the film company owner, and we'll see what happens. And that's kind of what kicked that off.
It is a absolutely fabulous film, and I don't know. I've probably watched it 2 or 3 different times. I just think it's such a great, and there's so much about it that resonates to a personal level, not just from me, but working in this wellness industry for a number of years. You hear, not every nuance of that film I identify with, but it resonates on stories that I hear over there or over here, and the marriage and the difficulties and even IA. There's so much of this film that is so good to people who are really having a hard time. But I want to thank you for offering up and being so transparent and being led by God spiritually to write a book, because I think it's been enormously impactful to so many people. If people want to find the movie or the book or Jonathan Hickory, give us a little bit of, where do we find information? How do we connect? If they want to bring you in as a motivational speaker, inspirational speaker, tell us a little bit how do they do that? Just kind of, if we wrap this up a little bit, how do they find Jonathan Hickory?
It's really easy. So you can find me on Facebook, but you can also find me on Instagram or whatever. But the easiest way is to just go to breakeverychainmovie.com. It's all one word. If you Google Break Every Chain Movie, that website will come up, breakeverychainmovie.com, and there's like email links on there, or you can email me directly at breakeverychainmovie, all one word, at gmail.com. So that's probably the easiest way to get in touch with me. Certainly not a big shot. I'm out there to help people, and I'm just so thankful that this book and this movie is helping people, because that's what it's all about. It's about glorifying God, and it's about saving lives.
No, your humility certainly rings through, because I'm sitting here on the website and I see 15 different award announcements on the website. Best inspirational film, winner best film, best informational, just on and on and on. Best debut. You're being pretty humble, because this is a great movie. So to all of our listeners, I would encourage you to jump on there, check it out. You can find it on Prime Video. I know I just looked it up on mine. I have Prime Video. I just looked it up earlier today. Still on there. I've encouraged countless people actually, to go watch the movie, because it actually is a oftentimes people like us like to hide. They don't. It's that stigma piece. They don't know where to connect. I say, hey, watch this movie. See if you identify with it. If you do, give me a call. It's just a great platform to have a conversation while not having a conversation. So
yeah.
Jonathan Hickory, thank you so much for coming on the No One Fights Alone podcast. We really appreciate you being here, and really appreciate the book and the movie. So thank you so much.
My honor, my pleasure. Bless you guys. Thank you for the work that you do.
Appreciate you, man.
Chateau Health and Wellness is a 16-bed treatment facility nestled in the foothills of the Wasatch Mountains in Midway, Utah. Chateau's First Responder Resiliency Program is designed to treat the unique challenges and issues that first responders encounter in the course of their careers. Chateau's comprehensive and highly individualized approach to treatment addresses more than just the presenting issues. It addresses the why. Each of their seasoned, trauma-trained, and culturally competent therapists utilize evidence-based, specialized therapies to treat trauma at its core and enable clients to begin the healing process while developing a resilient and healthy relationship with stress. Chateau Health and Wellness is trusted by departments and agencies from around the country to treat responders and veterans. In fact, it is one of only a handful of facilities nationwide that is vetted and approved to treat members of the Fraternal Order of Police. For more information or to speak to a representative, go to chateaurecovery.com or call 888-507-5031.